Parivasharanam. We have seen the Dhyana Shlokas and the meaning of the Dhyana Shlokas as well. We have also now learned to recite the first 10 verses of first chapter. Now, this recording is an introduction to the setting of the Bhagavad Gita before we move on to the meaning of the first 10 verses of first chapter. The Bhagavad Gita, as we all know, it was originally compiled by Vedavyasa and it was compiled as a separate text. Later, when he wrote the Mahabharata, he actually brought the Bhagavad Gita in it. The Mahabharata, we all know, it contains about 100,000 verses and it is the largest poem in the world. The Mahabharata is divided into 18 sections. The Bhagavad Gita appears in the 6th section and it is called the Bhishma Parva. Since the Bhagavad Gita actually talks about most of the important aspects of the knowledge that we have in the Vedas, it is also called as the Gita Upanishad or the Gita Upanishad. It actually brings out two important purposes. It imparts what is called as the Brahma Vidya, which is the science of knowing the absolute truth, the science of God realization. Secondly, it teaches the practice of yoga. The Bhagavad Gita is just not a content with a lot of philosophical understanding, but it also offers techniques for implementing in our spiritual everyday life. These techniques of applying the science of spirituality in our life is called as yoga. Hence, the Bhagavad Gita is also called as Yoga Shastra, meaning the scripture that teaches the practice of yoga. In order that we all fully appreciate the value of Bhagavad Gita, the historical flow of events that actually led to the speaking of the divine message by Lord Krishna, Bhagavan himself, to Arjuna on the battlefield of Kurukshetra, we must understand that as well. The setting in which Bhagavad Gita was spoken was the onset of the Mahabharata, a huge colossal war that was about to begin between two sets of cousins, the Kauravas on one side and the Pandavas on the other side. The Pandavas, Yudhishthir, Bhim, Arjun, Nakul and Sahadev. They were 5 noble brothers. Their father, King Pandu, he had actually suffered an unfortunate death while his 5 sons were still very, very young. Pandu's throne therefore was taken over by his step-brother Dhritarashtra, who was blind from birth. Dhritarashtra actually had 100 sons and they were called Kauravas. The eldest of them was Duryodhan. For years, the Kauravas led by Duryodhan had victimized their cousins, the Pandavas, and governed over the kingdom of Hastinapur, which did not rightfully belong to them. The Kauravas always embodied cruelty, injustice, oppression, and irreligion. On the other hand, the Pandavas were saintly and virtuous people, the epitomes of morality, sacrifice, devotion, and compassion. Most importantly, they were great devotees of the Supreme Lord Sri Krishna Bhagavan. Due to the oppression meted out to them by the Kauravas, the miseries of the Pandavas had become so unbearable that a war between the two sides had become imminent. As part of the vigorous mobilization attempts, both Arjuna and Duryodhan reached Dwaraka to request help from Lord Krishna. Being omniscient, Sri Krishna knew that they were coming to ask for help. He posed as if he was sleeping in his chamber. Arjun entered the chamber and in a mood of humbleness sat by the side of Sri Krishna's feet, waiting for him to wake up. In the meantime, Duryodhan also arrived and in his characteristic arrogance, he sat on a chair behind Sri Krishna's head. When Sri Krishna awoke, his eyes obviously fell upon Arjuna and later he was told that Duryodhan is also there. Both parties sought his assistance in the war. Since Arjuna and Duryodhan were both Sri Krishna's cousins, he did not wish to be blamed as if being partial. So he offered that to one side he would give his huge army of the kingdom of Dwaraka, while to the other side he would himself remain but without any weapons or army. Since Sri Krishna had seen Arjun first upon waking up, he gave the first choice to pick Arjuna. Arjuna elected to have Sri Krishna on his side, though without any weapons. He decided that if God was with him, he will win. Duryodhan was pleased by Arjun's choice, for he believed only on material strength, based on material might. The Supreme Lord Bhagwan, Lord Sri Krishna, therefore became the charioteer of Arjun in the war. On the verge of the battle, huge armies had gathered on either side upon the battlefield of Kurukshetra. Just before the combat was about to begin, Arjun requested Lord Krishna to pull his chariot between the two armies. On seeing the warriors who had arrayed themselves for combat, Arjun lost heart. In a fit of despondency, he threw down his bow and refused to fight. Arjun was in a critical situation and in a confused situation. He was a victim of a moral paradox. On one hand, he was thinking about his grandfather Bhishma and his teacher Dronacharya. On the other hand, he was thinking about his duty as a warrior. It seemed like a dilemma without a solution. So bewildered, demoralized, disappointed with life and dejected with events, Arjun surrendered complete to the Supreme Lord, Lord Krishna. In this state of Arjun's moral confusion, Sri Krishna set out to enlighten him. The Bhagavad Gita begins as a dialogue between King Dhritarashtra and his minister Sanjaya. Since Dhritarashtra was blind, he could not be personally present on the battlefield. Dhritarashtra initiates a conversation by asking Sanjaya about the proceedings in the battlefield. He does not speak again in the Gita. He is answered by Sanjaya, who relates the happenings. Sanjaya was a disciple of Veda Vyasar, and by the grace of his teacher, he possessed the mystique ability of distant vision. He could see and hear what was happening very far from where he was in the palace itself. Thus, he could see from far all that transpired on the battleground. And therefore, he was giving Dhritarashtra a first-hand account of the events on the war front. Sanjay pops in and out throughout the book as he relates to Dhritarashtra what he sees and hears. Thus, he says, Sri Bhagavan Uvacha, the Supreme Lord said, and Arjuna Uvacha, Arjuna said, etc. The major portion of the dialogue is between Lord Krishna and Arjun. Arjun asks questions and Sri Krishna answers. The conversation is a bit one-sided as Sri Krishna does most of the talking. As Lord Bhagwan Sri Krishna himself is answering to the questions as posed by Arjuna, in our own life we may have lot of questions. We may also be in a perplexed and a confused situation many times in our life. So wherever it says Arjuna Vacha, we can put ourselves in that position as if we are asking Lord Krishna the question and he humbly answering us. In Bhagavad Gita, Sri Krishna is referred to by many names: Hrishikesh, Keshav, Govind, Madhusudan, Achyuta, etc. Similarly, Arjun is also called Dhananjaya, Gudeksha, Kauteya, etc. Often these names are deliberately chosen to convey a particular meaning or a flavor to the conversation. So come join me in this beautiful journey of conversation with Lord Krishna, as if we were Arjuna asking humbly to Lord Krishna to help us cross this cycle of birth and death. May Bhagwan and Guru Mahaperiva be with us in this divine journey and guide us in understanding the essence of Bhagavad Gita, the lovely and beautiful messages given by Lord Krishna to handle this life. Periva Sharanam.